Welcome to the 2021 RFK Book and Journalism Awards. We will begin shortly. This ceremony and all of the important programs at RFK Human Rights rely on donations from generous friends. If you enjoy this evening's celebration and would like to see more content from RFK programs, please consider supporting our efforts. There is an easy-to-navigate donation button at the top of your screen. Our program will begin shortly.
Welcome, everyone, to the Robert F. Kennedy Book and Journalism Awards for the year 2021. Sorry we're not together for the second time in a row. Would be so nice to be in the same room, but better to be cautious. And all I can say is I hope that by the time we do this next year, at least some of us can have the pleasure of being together and celebrating Robert Kennedy and celebrating our winners. For those who haven't been tuning in since our virtual meeting a year ago, life has changed in the United States. And maybe the best way to say it is there has been a change in the White House. White supremacy has been driven out of the Oval Office, and Robert Kennedy's bust is sitting right there next to President Biden's fireplace, just the way it should be. We're living at a happier time, and it's a very good time for us to have this ceremony to honor Robert Kennedy's ideals. We will first have the pleasure of hearing from our great champion, and that champion and friend of democracy and voting rights for everyone, Kerry Kennedy, author, attorney, activist, and president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights.
Thank you, Michael. And thanks to you and to Peggy and all the judges for your hard work over the last year choosing these incredible winners for the RFK Journalism and Book Awards. And also thank you, everyone who's joining in today as we honor the journalists and writers who work so bravely and diligently for a more just and peaceful world. Nearly 6 months ago today, Murder the Media was emblazoned on the door of the United States Capitol as violent protesters broke video equipment and punched a photographer. Traitors fashioned a noose out of a camera cord and hung it from a tree. And when TV cameras in the House and Senate were shut off, courageous journalists and photographers risked their lives documenting one of the most threatening and chaotic moments in American history. That's the job of journalism today. And it's been a long history of journalists at risk in our country. Biased fake news sources continue to take advantage of public mistrust, spinning alternate narratives to build their relevance and their profits. This is part of a long history of partisan political leaders spreading conspiracy theories for political gain, including denying the Holocaust, saying that the moon landing was a hoax and Sandy Hook was staged. I don't need to tell you that thanks to these spoon-fed lies, tens of thousands of Americans believe that last fall election was stolen from Donald Trump, that the coronavirus vaccine was created by Bill Gates and is being placed in microchips in all of us who take the vaccine so they can watch our every move, and that Democratic elites used a DC pizza shop basement for child sexual abuse. Democracy may have prevailed in November, but it remains gravely at risk in our country and around the world. Trained, unbiased journalists are needed more than ever to speak truth to this corrupt power, to keep us properly informed, engaged, and prepared for what may come next. As the honorees here tonight know well, the job is more difficult than ever. Still, they break through the noise to present the truth and correct the record and put their own lives and health on the line in an increasingly hostile environment. These brave patriots are a small band of brothers and sisters, smaller and smaller all the time. In fact, there are fewer of you than ever before, with the number of reporters, editors, photographers, and videographers declining by nearly 40,000 in the United States alone in the last decade. The RFK Journalism Awards were founded in 1968 to recognize journalists who were brave enough to speak truth to power. And the belief in a free press and its role in the protection of civic space is at the core of the work here at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, as it has been for more than 50 years. At the moment, intrepid RFK human rights lawyers are representing the Nigerian journalist and human rights defender Omoyele Sowore, who has been unlawfully arrested, arbitrarily detained, and maliciously prosecuted by his own government. Last year, our case before the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions led to the release of Egyptian Al Jazeera journalist Mahmoud Hussein, who spent more than 4 years in arbitrary detention without trial as the scapegoat in one of the world's most oppressive countries for press freedoms and human rights. We are also representing the family of Mexican journalist Alfredo Jimenez Mota, who disappeared in 2005 following his reporting on drug trafficking in Sonora. More than 15 years later, no one has been arrested, and the case has not been brought before a judge to ensure that those responsible are held accountable. But RFK Human Rights is on the front line seeking change. All of us must turn the tide together by recognizing journalists, by fighting for their rightful place in the work to protect civic space at home and abroad. Today, we celebrate journalists' invaluable contributions to keeping us engaged and informed in these complicated and challenging times. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Carrie. Before we begin announcing our award winners, I'd like to recognize the 2021 Journalism Committee. It consists of Roberta Baskin, Jennifer Eight Lee, Kimberly Adams, John Sigenthaler Jr., Alicia Shepard, Karen Tumulty, and Jim Wooten. They were invaluable. I thank them and the dozens of other judges in this year's competition. Journalists were challenged in the last year like never before. They covered racial justice protests in the midst of a pandemic. They covered the heartbreak of 2 million deaths from a virus. And, in a dangerous and hostile situation, covered an insurrection that threatened to topple the United States government. What we learned was something we already knew, that a vibrant, fearless, aggressive free press is what sustains us. It protects us and our institutions and keeps our democracy strong. This year, we celebrate the type of journalism that explores issues important to Robert F. Kennedy, themes like human rights, social justice, and the power of individual action. Once again this year, we are grateful to have special presenters help us award these coveted honors. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Don Lemon.
Thanks, Peggy. I'm so proud to play a role in today's virtual awards ceremony. Every year, Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights celebrates amazing journalism, and we always kick off these awards by saluting the next generation of journalists. This year's high school print award winners were behind an investigation that prompted stories in the New York Times and The Guardian. These teens were dogged in their investigating how Kentucky trains its law enforcement officers. Many of the adults they dealt with didn't take them seriously. Their public records requests to the Kentucky State Police were ignored, and potential interview subjects laughed them off. But the journalists from DuPont Manual High School in Louisville, Kentucky prevailed. They educated us all with their series of reports, Bigoted Badges, how hate and violence are embedded in Kentucky law enforcement training. Take a look.
Kentucky State Police are under the spotlight for using a quote from Adolf Hitler.
Grizzled newspaper reporters are used to seeing their stories in print in the morning and then watching the local news stations running their stories on the evening news. But it's rare that exclusive, well-researched, thorough investigative reporting from kids ends up landing on the evening newscasts.
The controversial slideshow was first reported on by students here at Manual High School. Now, state lawmakers are grilling a top official in Governor Andy Beshear's administration about the scandal.
Students Cooper Walton and his brother Satchel broke the story of a Kentucky State Police training presentation featuring quotes from Adolf Hitler. An attorney saw the slideshow and offered the tip to professional journalists who took a pass. But these dogged high school reporters ran with it, with the help of Editor-in-Chief Peyton Carnes and their student advisors. They verified its authenticity and then found another law enforcement agency using a video from a neo-Nazi film company, which sparked another investigation. The reporting prompted Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear to launch a top-to-bottom review of law enforcement training materials.
We're not going to rest until we fix this.
Congratulations to reporters Satchel and Cooper Walton and Editor-in-Chief Peyton Carnes of the Manual Red Eye for their series of reports, Bigoted Badges, How Hate and Violence Are Embedded in Kentucky Law Enforcement Training, which is this year's winner for high school print. When our high school broadcast winners learned in early March that school would be going virtual and that they would be locked out of their studio, they wondered how would they get a broadcast on the air. Was it worth it to even try during COVID? These young journalists knew they could serve their community if they could figure out a way to get their newscasts on the air. They did. And here's an excerpt from the pandemic program.
Good afternoon, Prosper. As we enter our third week of online learning, this will be your first full week. Eagle Nation News is back. I'm Lauren Womack, and this is the pandemic program, bringing you all you need to know from at least 6 feet away.
High school students in Prosper, Texas had no access to their studio, very little equipment, but somehow still managed to get a daily broadcast on the air. It provided important information for struggling families.
Local Yokel, a McKinney favorite, is selling unused boxes of produce to provide enough food to last families through the school closures.
It also provided a sense of community in a world of isolation, giving students a chance to sound off in the Quarantine Chronicles.
Hi, Eagle Nation. I'm so blessed that I have the opportunity to say hello and say that I hope y'all are connecting with your teachers and your classmates through e-learning. I know I sure am.
Hey, Eagle Nation. It's like day, I don't know, however long of quarantine, but basically what I've been doing since we've been out is just eating, going to work still, playing on my phone. That's about it. I'm actually kind of missing school, so hopefully we can go back soon and finish the year off the right way.
Thank you so much for watching our very first episode of the pandemic program. Be sure to come back next week for daily episodes. I'm Casey Boston. Have a great rest of your day, and remember to stay at least 6 feet away.
We want to congratulate Eagle Nation News at Prosper High School in Prosper, Texas. Our winners are producer Grant Johnson and anchor Casey Boston, and writers Christina Folsom and Maggie Hale for their entry, the pandemic program. Now it's time to recognize our college winner, and here to do the honors is Hoda Kotb.
Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights salutes young people who are making a difference. We look to students to light the way as the next generation of journalists holding people in power accountable. Each year, students on the Carnegie Night News 21 team from Arizona State University take on a topic of national importance. This year, they attempt to dissect all the complex reasons why there is a school-to-prison pipeline and what can be done about it. The result is kids imprisoned. Here's a look.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, policing and racial injustice have become a national conversation, and a key focus, the school-to-prison pipeline. The pipeline is exactly what it sounds like, a direct connection between our schools and the juvenile justice system. Basically, a student is disciplined by their teacher and gets suspended, or sometimes the teacher calls in the school police officer, or sometimes a police officer disciplines the student first. Or the student gets suspended more than once, so they get labeled a bad kid and begin to believe it. Then they fall behind in school, or they get expelled, and then the school police officer arrests them for truancy, and now this is getting way too complicated.
It may sound complicated, but News 21 student journalists break it down for us. What they find is for children in the United States, justice is often all about where you live, the color of your skin, and which officer you happen to irritate on any given day.
Michael Blanchett was enrolled in special education at Narragansett High School in Rhode Island. He had an individual education plan that allowed him to leave class and walk through the halls to relieve anxiety. In February 2018, the 16-year-old was stopped by a school resource officer while on a hallway walk. According to the police report, Michael aggressively stepped toward the officer and gave him the middle finger. He was body slammed and held to the ground for 6 minutes. Michael was charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. When the case came to trial, the charges were dismissed. The officer involved is still working for the Narragansett Police Department.
News 21 student journalists talk with experts about how millions spent on school resource officers could be better allocated to benefit students.
$50 million could buy a lot of counselors, a lot of social workers, a lot of nurses. Districts find other ways to sustain these police positions at the cost of other critical services.
The College Journalism Award winner is Kids Imprisoned, a sweeping multimedia project of the Carnegie Knight News 21 program from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. Congratulations to the entire team who contributed to this incredible project. Now here's Katie Couric to announce the domestic print winner.
Our domestic print winners analyzed how Confederate icons were created and exalted throughout the South. It was a detailed, unusual, and difficult examination, resulting in 35 articles, photographs, and history. It's a rich multimedia effort involving the newsrooms of the USA Today Network in the South, newsrooms in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas cooperated to bring the unexamined to light. The result is The Confederate Reckoning. Here's the sampling.
The Confederate Reckoning is a mammoth journalistic undertaking. This sweeping series of reports comes from reporters who pass by Confederate monuments all the time. They dot the very landscape they call home. They're in front of courthouses and adorn town squares. The USA Today Network in the South put together this expansive multi-part multimedia package called The Confederate Reckoning. Reporters from newspapers in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas all worked on this effort. They delved into the passion.
When I see a Confederate monument, I see a tombstone. I see a marker for the Confederate soldier who never made it home.
And pain surrounding these statues.
And I'm not sure if supporters of the Confederacy recognize how hurtful these monuments are to Black people. To us, they represent a time when our foreparents were enslaved.
The Confederate Reckoning debunks the mythology surrounding these monuments.
The existence of these statues is very important. If we destroy these memorials, what we've done is we've tried to eradicate from our memory the fact that they were built in order to maintain white supremacy. And we need to remember that we did that.
The domestic print winner is The Confederate Reckoning. Michael Anastasi, editor, USA Today Network South, and Mark Russell, executive editor of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. Now it is my distinct pleasure to pass the baton to my good friend, Nick Kristof.
Hi there. Our next award honors the wide-ranging work of a pair of investigative journalists from the Associated Press. They look at palm oil, a product that's found in roughly half the products on supermarket shelves. But they ask, how did it get to our local market? The answer is disturbing, as we learn about the abuse of laborers that has gone unchecked for years. Here's a look at their project, Fruits of Labor.
The Associated Press investigative journalists Margie Mason and Robin McDowell expose an entire industry built on the backs of the poor and vulnerable. They hear from women and girls raped in the fields. They tell the stories of illiterate children who have no time for school when they're working 12-hour days in the fields. They interview victims of trafficking and outright slaves who are held against their will and sold onto plantations with the help of police. The Fruits of Labor series had an immediate impact on Capitol Hill, with lawmakers demanding the government clamp down harder on palm oil imports.
The International Print Award goes to the Associated Press for Fruits of Labor. Our congratulations to global investigative journalists Margie Mason and Robin McDowell. Now, here's Sean Yancey.
Masterful photographer John Irving once said, "A good photograph is one that communicates a fact, touches the heart, and leaves the viewer changed forever for having seen it." Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights recognizes the power of images. Our domestic photographer set out to document one of the most important stories of our time, but he had to overcome some dangerous obstacles and the threat of the coronavirus as he entered packed marches to capture his images and police who appeared to be targeting activists and journalists alike. Andre Chung gained the trust of protesters to deliver the award-winning body of work titled, "We Keep Us Safe." Take a look.
So many photographers trained their lenses on the protesters demanding racial justice in the summer of 2020. Andre Chung recognized that demonstrators in Washington were distrustful of the media because the coverage lacked nuance. So he set out to present activists as full and three-dimensional. As the photography judges point out, by embedding himself with the people involved in the struggle, he's able to peel back the onion and offer a more complete understanding of the relationships and events he witnessed. Moments like these, a young man getting a protest haircut, and this iconic moment at the Lincoln Memorial. As the judges point out, this work gives us a deeper appreciation of this complex moment in American history.
The domestic photography winner is Andre Chung for "We Keep Us Safe." Congratulations, Andre, for your important photographs. Now, here's John Harwood.
Our international photography winner was dispatched to Ethiopia about the time of year when farmers are in their fields for harvest. Instead, they were chased from their homes when a factional war erupted. Fighting sent people from fields, homes, even hospitals fleeing to neighboring Sudan. AP photographer Nariman El-Mofty captures the humanity and the heartbreak as she covers the crisis. Here's a look at ethnic war forcing thousands of Ethiopians into Sudan.
It is a picture of shoes, but it's emblematic of a much larger story of Ethiopians struggling to escape the conflict in Tigray. The refugees jump on boats, leaving their shoes behind as they cross a river to safety. Thousands escape the mounting tensions. Some travel long distances to the border with Sudan, only to then be packed on a bus for a lengthy 11-hour ride to a temporary shelter. Here, mothers clutch their malnourished and dehydrated babies as they await life-saving IVs. Our photography judges believe Nariman El-Mofty captures all of it with the eye of a painter. She documents the dignity of mothers forced from their homes. She captures a boy peering at a Bible during Sunday Mass at a refugee camp in eastern Sudan. In just one image, one fleeting moment in time, she captures all the emotions of the chaos these people must endure. Here it is. A young man is smiling, knowing he escaped the violence. But then there's this baby with a terrified expression and an equally concerned mother who has no way of knowing what the future holds.
The international photography winner is Nariman El-Mofty for her heartbreaking, moving images. War forces thousands of Ethiopians into Sudan. Congratulations. Now here's Chanel Jones.
This year's radio-winning entry is Canary, a 7-part podcast. Every year, an estimated 400,000 Americans are sexually assaulted. Investigative journalist Amy Britton handles the stories of 2 survivors with sensitivity and care. These women step forward to relate their suffering, trauma, and difficulty finding justice. Let's listen.
3 years ago, I was sitting in the Washington Post newsroom when I got a call. It was an attorney who knew I had worked on stories about sexual assault, and she had a tip for me. I'm Amy Britton, and I'm an investigative reporter. And her story started me on a reporting journey that has lasted for nearly 3 years.
Those stories would make up Canary, the 7-part investigative podcast. In Chapter 1, we are introduced to Lauren Clark, who was jogging in D.C. when a stranger attacked her.
The collision of a man's body against my own. Pavement, panic, pain. For days, I can still feel his hands on me. With each step I took, I felt the sidewalk tearing into my skin again, and my own reflection reminding me of the man who left my face swollen and bruised.
Her powerful description of what happened was read in court, but Judge Truman Morrison only sentenced the assailant to just 10 days in jail, served on weekends.
It just felt cheap. What happened to me felt so much worse than that.
The story of the attack resonated with a 59-year-old baker from Alabama. That's because Carol Griffin had a stunning allegation.
Carol alleged that Judge Truman Morrison had sexually assaulted her when she was a teenage girl.
It's a secret she hid away for decades. The judge left the bench after admitting to the charge.
I've had this inside of me for so long, and I don't feel like anybody took it seriously.
This podcast demonstrates that for these women, time fades, but the scars from sexual violence and the wounds from a judicial system that fails them can last forever.
The radio winner this year is the 7-part podcast Canary from the Washington Post. Our congratulations to investigative reporter Amy Britton and audio producers Rena Flores and Bishop Sand for their exemplary work. Now here's Rory Kennedy to tell us about this year's New Media winner.
When Thomas Brennan finished writing the New Media Award-winning entry, he passed it along to his editor, Kelly Kennedy. She summed it up this way: "Reading it broke my heart." Brennan is the lead reporter at The War Horse, a nonprofit newsroom focused on the military. The winning entry detailed how military culture silenced a refugee turned Marine corporal after she was raped. Instead of finding justice, she is denied mental health services and now, incredibly, faces charges of attempted murder. Here's a look at Gag Order: How Marine Corps Culture Silenced a Victim of Sexual Assault.
Warhorse tells the story of Tai who dreamed of a career as a Marine. But her dream turned into a nightmare after an evening with friends at a barracks party. She had more than a few drinks, and friends got her to bed in her barracks. She woke up to find a sergeant on top of her removing her clothes. She wrote this handwritten account of that night.
It's all dark and foggy in my head. I don't remember much. I could see his ugly smirk and that disgusting hot breath. He's the worst. Please, I said. But that's all I can say before it all became so dark.
Reporter Thomas Brennan, managing editor Kelly Kennedy, and fact-checker Ben Kalin had to work together on this sensitive subject while all working apart because of the pandemic.
This is a Marine who should have got help. This is not a Marine that should have been thrown in jail where her mental health was just, destroyed even more than it already had been by the Marines who betrayed her during her service.
What they chronicle is a young woman taunted by coworkers and let down by commanders after 3 suicide attempts. As Brennan writes, her plan spiraled off course as she battled post-traumatic stress, which only worsened when over and over she learned nobody cared.
The New Media winner is Gag Order: How Marine Corps Culture Silenced a Victim of Sexual Assault. Congratulations to investigative reporter Thomas Brennan, managing editor Kelly Kennedy, and fact-checker Ben Kalin from the War Horse News. Now let's hear about the cartoon winner this year from Natalie Morales.
Each year, Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights salutes a cartoonist making a statement. Most years, they present their sharp wit to help drive political discourse. This year, we have a unique award winner with Ty Bui's illustrations of a series of journalism reports on inequality. Here's a look at Invulnerable, a comics journalism collaboration published by Reveal and the Nib.
This year's cartoon winner is as unique as the pandemic it illustrates. Invulnerable, inequity in the time of a pandemic, is sweeping in its scope. The Reveal team used the cartoons to look at the pandemic through the lens of inequality. Reporters interviewed subjects around the country and whittled down their interviews into their essence. A few sentences tell a short story and accompany each panel. There's Manuel, frightened because he knows if the virus makes it to the ICE detention center where he's staying, it will be a ticking time bomb. There's Sarah, an 11th grader in Chicago, who feels like the floor is given way as her life is turned upside down by the pandemic. Then there's the overwhelmed ER doctor in New York. Rajneesh says no matter what we did, we can't catch up.
Our cartoon winner is Invulnerable, a comics journalism collaboration published by Reveal and The Nib. And our congratulations go to executive producer Amanda Pike and her team. Now let's hear from Soledad O'Brien, who has this year's domestic television winner.
Thanks so much. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there's been a spike in substance abuse during the pandemic as people try to self-medicate in an effort to cope with the stress and emotions related to COVID-19. The pandemic is accelerating a growing crisis in the U.S. Every day, 200 people die from overdoses in this country. In our domestic television entry, we go to the front lines to meet people who are trying to combat this crisis head on. 16 and Recovering showcases a new model in education to help teenagers grappling with addiction. Here's a sampling from this powerful MTV documentary series.
I mean, just look at them. Look at these children. How can anyone give up on them? The world needs to be a kinder, gentler place with people struggling with addiction, and I just don't feel like people are getting that. Because we treat them like they're bad when they're sick, and I'm done with that.
Welcome to Recovery High, a special school with a caring staff that gets it. They provide counseling, recovery support, and restorative practices. In this extraordinary series, 16 and Recovering, MTV takes us inside the school where things are definitely different.
That if you do need to go to the bathroom, everybody's drug testing today.
But in many ways, they are the same as any other high school. We see kids who are playful. They are big-hearted and goofy. We witness their enthusiasm as they shop for dresses for the prom.
I look like Audrey Hepburn.
Each student has a story to tell.
I'm Sean O'Neill. I'm impulsive, creative, insightful, caring, compassionate.
And most of all, he's clean.
Tell me again how long you've been sober now?
114 days.
That's amazing. Yeah. All right.
But Sean knows his sunny smile hides his painful struggles with darkness, demons, and drugs.
I've been doing this since I was 12 years old to numb like any kind of feeling I've ever had. I use when I'm happy, sad, excited, grieving.
Despite the school's best efforts, Sean relapses. The school principal works desperately to get him into a treatment program, but insurance company requirements fail Sean, and he ends up back at home instead.
He passed away this morning. I was just with him. I thought he was okay.
16 and Recovering is an unvarnished look at the painful moments and the struggles these children endure as we meet young kids trapped in the sea of heartbreak that the opioid crisis in America has produced.
I just want to know why.
The domestic television winner is Steve Liss, Ben Hurwitz, Lily Newmeyer, and the team at MTV for their compelling documentary series, 16 and Recovering, which sheds light on this tragic national crisis and introduces us to the children ensnared in this opioid crisis. Now, here's Nora O'Donnell.
A fearful hidden world exists in Chechnya. To save LGBTQ citizens from state-encouraged torture and death, an underground network of rescuers are hiding persecuted people and engineering daring escapes. It's heart-stopping to watch as courageous activists desperately try to save LGBTQ Chechens who are targeted for unspeakable discrimination. Here's a look at HBO's Welcome to Chechnya.
Скажи, пожалуйста, насколько критична ситуация?
Дело в том, что мой дядя узнал про мою ориентацию вот недавно. Он в любом случае меня убьет.
пользователи получают первые сообщения из Чечни о том, что в Чечне происходит массовое задержание геев.
One critic describes Welcome to Chechnya as having all the nervous energy of a peak-born thriller. It is a heart-stopping documentary that introduces us to daring, courageous Russian activists. They are risking everything to whisk people from the LGBTQ community out of the country. For the people they're helping, it's their only chance for a future where they can love whoever they want. The leader in Russia's southern republic makes no secret of his open war to cleanse the blood of his own citizens.
I wanted to ask you about the alleged abduction and torture of gay men in the republic.
Это ерунда. У нас таких людей нету.
For those escaping, it will mean a total break from the past and present just so that they can hope for a future without secrecy and fear. But they recognize how much they will have to sacrifice just to be safe and secure.
Да и поговорить больше на своем родном языке мне не удастся, и голоса своих родных я больше никогда в жизни не услышу.
Filmmaker David France took enormous risks in getting this story, and he used tremendous care in protecting the people he profiled. A pioneering technique, leaning on AI and deep machine learning, is used to digitally map American-based activists over the faces of the survivors to protect their identities. This searing, hard-hitting exposé helped focus international attention on this travesty, prompting the UK and US governments to impose sanctions.
The international television winner is David France for HBO's Welcome to Chechnya. Now, here are some special honors this year. To tell us about them is Craig Melvin.
The currents of protests this year prompted RFK Human Rights to acknowledge with hope the vital work being done by young journalists. Our first New Voices for Justice honor is bestowed on our high school print winners for bigoted badges, how hate and violence are embedded in Kentucky law enforcement training.
We'd like to thank RFK Human Rights. It's a great honor to receive this award, which has been won by so many journalists who we admire.
Absolutely. Now, throughout the course of this investigation, we detailed how the Kentucky State Police had for years used training slideshows quoting Hitler and Robert E. Lee.
However, the problems with the trainings run far deeper than the jaw-dropping headline.
They quote Hitler advocating a ruthless violence, part of a nationwide trend of teaching officers to be warriors, to always be ready to kill. And while we're very proud of this project, we certainly did not complete it alone.
We couldn't have done it without the amazing students who helped us on the series, or the tireless dedication of our advisors and teachers at Manual J&C, the greatest high school journalism program in the country.
RFK Human Rights also wishes to recognize the urgency of addressing criminal justice reform in these fraught times. The first Criminal Justice Reform Prize goes to Reuters for Dying Inside, a definitive, factual look at hidden numbers of people who die in America's prisons. Take a look.
It's sad that people just ignore people.
In Dying Inside, we meet this nurse turned whistleblower who's witnessed unspeakable horrors inside this jail. She says her employer, Couric Healthcare, directed her to keep costs down by avoiding sending inmates to the hospital. So we witness inmates dying inside, including this elderly man jailed for missing a court date, literally crawling across the jail floor, begging to go to a hospital as an infection attacks his leg. He'll die when aid does not arrive on time. Then there's Matthew Laughlin.
Still throwing up blood? Yeah.
He's an inmate here on drug charges. Medical staff have determined that Matthew is suffering from congestive heart failure, but his pleas to go to the hospital go unanswered. Reuters obtains his last phone call with his mother before his death.
I'm doing everything I can to get you out.
I've been coughing up blood. My feet are swollen. It hurts. I'm gonna die in here.
These are just some of the more than 7,000 deaths documented by Reuters in an investigative reckoning on inmate mortality in the nation's jails. Reuters peels back the shroud of government secrecy to reveal the sweeping systemic failures that have been hidden for decades.
We treat dogs better than people locked up, and it's very sad.
This year's Criminal Justice Reform Prize goes to Reuters for Dying Inside. Congratulations to reporter Peter Eisler, investigative editor Jason Zepp, correspondent Linda So, data journalist Grant Smith, and Ned Parker and team. Now here's John Siegenthaler Jr. to present a special award.
Hi everyone, I'm John Siegenthaler. Congratulations to all the winners. Now it's time to award the Siegenthaler Prize, which is named in honor of my father, who was a journalist and a fierce defender of the First Amendment. As friends of this award know, for many years he co-chaired the RFK Book Prize Committee and helped shepherd these RFK Journalism Award programs. He was a friend and trusted aide to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and a lifelong champion of civil rights. While trying to protect the Freedom Riders in Montgomery, Alabama in 1961, he was beaten by an angry white mob. This award is meant to recognize reporting under difficult circumstances that requires courage and commitment. I'm proud to announce that the winner of this year's Siegenthaler Prize is our International Television Award winner, Welcome to Chechnya, for difficult and dangerous work they did to bring horrifying persecution to the world's attention. Congratulations to David France and the entire HBO team.
Our film tells the story of an ongoing genocide against LGBTQ Russians at a time of rapidly increasing hostility against queer people around the world. It also tells the story of a worldwide group of activists who have put their lives on the line to rescue people from this genocide and get them to safety. This award recognizes that work, and it says to LGBTQ people around the world, we see you, we lift up your voices, we will defend you. In their name, we want to thank RFK Human Rights for this cherished award.
Now it's time to present our grand prize winner. The winner is the domestic print entry, A Confederate Reckoning, for its enterprising examination of the real history behind reverence for Confederate icons and symbols across the South. This is an unusual and controversial project that sheds light on the underpinnings of our attitudes, creating a culture that makes life more difficult and divisive for our citizens.
On behalf of more than 20 newsrooms throughout Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, and Mississippi, we express our gratitude to Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights and to all of those involved in the selection of this year's awards. It is indeed an extraordinary honor. It was, of course, just over a year ago that the country began grappling with far-reaching and profound questions around race, social justice, and American values. For those of us in the South, we asked, what might we bring to this debate that no one else can? And what resulted was this work. And while the South has a painful past, it is our profound wish that this journalism will contribute to a hopeful future. Thank you very much.
The pandemic has challenged journalists with layoffs, sickness, and hostility this year. The New York Times reported as many as 37,000 media workers experienced layoffs, furloughs, or lost pay because of the pandemic. Many found themselves exposed to the virus and infected while reporting, including some who covered a White House event last year. But through the hardships, journalists have continued to tell the most important stories. This demonstrates again why we must do everything possible to protect our free and fair press and ensure a future for journalism.
Thank you all so much. We thank all of you, we celebrate you, and we support you in everything that you do to speak truth to power. It has never, ever been more important in American history. Again, congratulations. And now it's time for our book award. And before we introduce our winner, I'd like to say a word about the man who is responsible for this award, which is Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the author of the great biography, 1978, Robert Kennedy and His Times. Arthur was the one who came up with the idea of honoring contemporary authors who share the convictions and ideals of Robert F. Kennedy. And so as a result, earlier this month, I was joined by fellow judges Annette Gordon-Reed and Randall Kennedy, and our newest judge, Bill Hamilton, who's held editorial positions at the New York Times and Washington Post and was a wonderful addition to our group. We had a number of strong contenders, books that examine racial justice and racial violence, incarceration, the separation crisis at the border, the decline of American democracy, as well as a book on Abraham Lincoln. Like most years, we debated the merits of each of these books before deciding unanimously on one winner. The winner of the 2021 Robert F. Kennedy Book Award is Claudio Sant for Unworthy Republic, The Dispossession of Native Americans, and the Road to Indian Territory. It's a heart-wrenching, powerful book about a shameful period in our country's history, and it also connects so much to Robert Kennedy's life and career. He was one of the earliest ones in American history to take a leading position in expanding the rights of Native Americans and indigenous peoples in our country. And on the last night of his conscious life, June 4th, 1968, he spoke by telephone to voters and citizens of the state of South Dakota, where he had been to visit the Pine Ridge Reservation and had been a champion of Native American rights, celebrating his victory that evening in the South Dakota presidential primary. And we now have the pleasure of hearing from our great winner, 2021 winner of the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, Claudio Sant.
It's a tremendous honor to receive the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award. It's especially gratifying that the jury found Unworthy Republic deserving of this recognition. When I started working on this book 7 years ago, I was interested in situating the United States alongside other nations in the 19th and 20th centuries. Nations that had counted, evaluated, deported, and tried to exterminate people within their borders. More specifically, I wanted to draw attention to the U.S. policy of indigenous expulsion, formulated in the 1830s and one of the pivotal moments in our national history. We've yet to come to terms with the conquest of the continent. There's been little serious reflection on its centrality to the rise of the United States, and minimal sustained engagement with the people who lost their homelands. As I was researching and writing and the politics in the nation were changing around me, the subject became more tightly relevant. That served as a motivating force for me, and I think made the book more present and urgent. I'm speaking to you from Athens, Georgia, land that once belonged to Muskogee Creek people. I want to recognize them and the other indigenous Americans whose stories make up Unworthy Republic, to honor the people who lost their lands and lives, and to acknowledge the survivors and their descendants. Unworthy Republic is about dispossession, white supremacy, and indigenous rights in the 1830s, but the story continues to this day.
Thank you so much, Claudio. I recommend that everyone buy at least 10 copies of Claudio's book and read it at least 10 times. You will find it extremely rewarding. And that brings our award ceremony this year for 2021 to an end. Thank you all very much for joining us. I hope we can all be together in person in the same room next year for next year's event. And also to make one point, and that is that if Robert Kennedy were to come back in the year 2021, it's 60 years after he became Attorney General of the United States, he would be shocked by the fact that here we are 60 years later, democracy in the United States is in jeopardy, and so are voting rights. Something we all have to work to make sure that both things are assured, and in doing so, we will do that in the highest tradition of the life and career of Robert Kennedy. For more information on our awards, please go to rfkhumanrights.org. Please stay safe and healthy. If you haven't already gotten vaccinated, please do it. Everyone, good night. Thank you again.
Our thanks to all of our special guest presenters and to our viewers. We are grateful to Mort Zuckerman and Eric Gartner for the gift that made this ceremony possible. To learn more about the important work at RFK Human Rights, we invite you to go to our website, rfkhumanrights.org. Thanks again for joining us for the 2021 RFK Book and Journalism Awards.